Hi there, welcome to the Culture of Life podcast from Human Life International. I'm Tad Wojcik, the Mission Research Specialist, and this is Father Shannon Bouquet, our president.
Good to be with you again, Tad.
Yes, absolutely, Father. Today we're going to be discussing your article from 2 weeks ago, When Freedoms Are Charged as Crimes. Now, this article considers two distinct issues that are closely related from the perspective of the culture of life right now. Well, let's start with the case of Päivi Räsänen. Who is she? What has she done? And why is she in the news lately?
Sure. Well, this goes back to 2019, Tad. Mm-hmm. And this is when she was a former minister of the Finland ministry. Okay. And she's a medical doctor. She's a mother of 5 children. She's a grandmother. Someone who's been involved in the public sphere, for a number of years. And so this goes back, like I said, to 2019 when the Lutheran Church, the state church here in Finland, decided to, sponsor or to give an endorsement to Pride Day. Okay. And this is when Räsänen decided to respond. She's believed in the biblical teaching, the traditional teaching, and of the Bible concerning the dignity of marriage between one man, one woman, and also of human sexuality. And so she, responded because she was disappointed in what her church was, in a sense, endorsing. And so this is when really, her difficulties began. And so what happened was that her government responded.
And I believe, just to say, her post was of scripture passage, right?
Correct, yes. So it's actually quoting directly from sacred scripture. And so she, and in doing that, the government reacted. Mm-hmm. And basically she's charged with a hate crime or, promoting something which incites people, to discriminate, against a group of people. And so from that point forward, she was charged not only with the crimes, but they also began to start looking into previous things that she had written, said, videos or comments. They went all the way back to 2004, when she published a pamphlet dealing with, a similar subject in the sense of the dignity of marriage as instituted by God, that the Bible teaches and helps us to understand. And it was also a pamphlet that was endorsed by her own bishop, her own Lutheran bishop, who eventually was also charged with a crime because this particular bishop allowed the pamphlet to be printed and to be endorsed. So, right. The issue in this particular case really would come as hopefully people will go to the article that I wrote to get a little more understanding. It really comes down to what she is defending, and that is freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and the ability to practice and to not only just to speak about her faith, but to express her faith, to live out her faith. Mm-hmm. And so this is really what this is coming down to.
I see. That's pretty indicative, illustrative of the type of situations we're dealing with lately with hate crimes and speech. Why is this considered, Father, sort of a landmark case or kind of like a pivotal moment in the world stage of the legal situation with respect to these types of comments and expressing faith and living it out?
Well, I think the main issue that I tried to bring up in the article is what we see happening in Finland in this particular case is that they're in our language here would be, attorney general, so the same equivalent of their own country is, even though receiving much backlash from the Lutheran Church itself and many other international Christian organizations and churches responding, saying, or what you're going to do, you're going to hold every Catholic, Christian, in a sense, promoting hate.
And that's interesting because it's the Lutheran, at least the state church in Finland itself, that was initially the reason for her comments. So it's not saying, it's saying, let's not prosecute her for this.
Right. Exactly. So what you have here is, even though they may be in the ones in 2019 that somehow gave some type of endorsement or some type of recognition, but you can also see that even within that community, there's division about how to approach this subject, how to deal with it. But at the end of the day, they said you can't prosecute. I mean, to do this, you're going to have to prosecute every Christian. And that's why I like how they point that out. So which makes this really something that all of us should be paying attention to, because it's not only in Finland that we see these kinds of events unfolding, we see this in other countries as well. And what I love about Räsänen is that she recognizes what this is really all about. I mean, she understands that it's about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to exercise religion. You know, that here the state is penalizing her for actually professing what she believes. So basically they're trying to stifle a person from exercising, you know, what they believe. And so this is an assault on freedom of religion. So, you know, freedom of religion is not the state saying you can exercise your religion in this part or this part, you know. So this is what she recognizes. But what I love also is that she recognizes that this is really coming down to the very fact it's very, very scriptural as well, because she's being prosecuted, or persecuted, I should say, and prosecuted, you know, because of her belief in traditional values. And so she sees this for what it really is. And I think it's important for all of us to be aware, because this is not just in Finland. I mean, we can talk about many other countries having similar stories.
Right. And you give a quote in the article of her saying, "If I'm convicted, I think that the worst consequence would not be the fine against me or even the prison sentence. It would be the censorship." So she fully understands the nature of her case, and it's kind of like a litmus test, sort of like a, you know, what do you call it? The battleground, or like the, you know, a key battle in this culture war.
Exactly. And what you just said is very important, Tad. It's a cultural war. And, you know, and unfortunately, you have someone in a position of authority, so basically the government, that is literally pushing down and basically saying to this person, but really to anyone else, if you don't follow the party line, if you don't follow the party narrative, if you don't follow, you know, what we say is legitimate and are not legitimate, basically we're going to come down on you. We're going to prosecute you. We're going to put you in jail. We're going to fine you these exorbitant things. So what they're doing is basically warning everybody. So that'd be people like you and myself. I mean, imagine, you know, someone reading this story and reading about what this person is going through, saying to themselves, wait a minute, I don't want to be put in jail. I don't want to be fined. I don't want to be separated from my family, you know. And so what it's doing is top down is just basically it's totalitarian. You know, you're forcing people, saying to them, "I will punish you if you don't follow the narrative."
Right.
And so that's censorship.
At the very least, it says you can't be a high-level public figure. I mean, she's been at the highest levels of government in Finland.
Right.
You can't be that person and have these views. You know, maybe you can hide away in your little rural village or whatever.
Right, but it's interesting because her bishop, or a bishop that gave permission for the pamphlet, for example, you know, is also being, you know, charged with a crime.
Right.
So you don't have to be a member of government. I mean, so here you have a person.
Anyone with a face in public.
Exactly.
Anyone with a voice.
So they're really, Finland is basically drawn their line in the sand. And so I really admire her for her willingness to go the distance, no matter what the end will be. You know, and I really believe that she will prevail because, you know, because so many more people now are coming into the conversation. But it still exposes a real problem. And even if she wins her case, it doesn't mean it goes away. It doesn't mean that this won't come up again for some other person, or, you know, someone else may decide to come and try to charge her again with something else, because you can imagine that she's not going to just quiet down. I mean, she's obviously someone very passionate about what she believes. And so she's expressing that. So it's a good warning for all of us. I mean, you and myself, Tad, this is a program that's people are going to see, they're going to hear, and, you know, this could be used against us. You know, and we could be charged with, basically inciting people to discriminate against a particular group of people, which is not what we're doing.
Not at all.
But we could be easily charged with that because we're raising a subject and disagreeing with the narrative. And I think that's why it's a global issue. We should not just say, oh, look what's happening in Finland, my goodness. But no, we should be saying what's happening there, how can that happen here? Is it happening here? We should be asking those kinds of questions. And people who are in the know, reading, learning, will realize it is happening here.
Right, and we can take a little look a little bit closer to home in that vein. Because in the article you mentioned the Canada C4 bill, and it's no longer a bill, it was just passed into law, I think January 7th. can you describe that bill and what that means? Because Canada's, that's our closest neighbor.
Our
to the
neighbors
north.
to the north. And so when we consider what's happening there, so basically now we're dealing with people, who, let's say, have been living in a homosexual lifestyle and want to have some type of conversion therapy. They're looking for assistance in basically redressing their life. And so what this did now is that basically it's making this illegal. And so that, for example, if I were a therapist, a family counselor, a professional therapist, that I could be charged, with a crime, for actually advancing and trying to help someone who may even have approached me. Or if I get up and get on a podcast like this and start talking about, this type of therapy and these types of interventions, because we're trying to assist people to step out of this particular lifestyle and to live in a manner that, again, back to biblical values, all right, back to traditional Christian values, be charged. But what's concerning, not only just the language, because it's so broad when you read.
Right, I was going to mention, because it's the impulse or the sort of motivating factor, what's said to be the purpose is not to address the kind of situation you're talking about, but it's supposedly some kind of aggressive, forced conversion therapy. And that's usually the term that's usually how that term is used, I think. We're using that term in a different sense, but at least when they say conversion therapy, they mean, I understand, a type of kind of a forced, kind of aggressive, like you can't do these things type of approach to psychology, which I'm not sure, but it doesn't seem to me that's very common at all, or if it happens at all anywhere. But the purpose of the bill then is to, like you're saying, with this broad language, address these situations where even if someone willingly wanted to go for counseling towards this, for behavioral therapy, that's illegal.
Exactly. That's the broad, because the language just leaves itself open. And so, but you're right. I mean, but with regard to the first part, with regard to some type of aggression, so for example, in other words, if you were to
or coercion.
Exactly. And so, I mean, obviously, so what happens, what we've noticed so many times, is they use, to advance these agendas, they try to use extreme situations. And so, I mean, most people, of good reason, realize that, forcing someone, in some kind of aggressive manner, this is not something that is commonly done. But what might, what is being done is, like, for example, you might have a pastor, you might have a minister in a particular community that will maybe bring this up in a youth meeting, maybe bring this up in a forum of college students, and so discussing something as if, and someone can walk away saying, well, this person is speaking ill of me, they're talking about me, and that's where they quote the aggression, kind of bringing this up and making me feel guilty or making me feel like I'm being discriminated against. So that's kind of how all this stuff moves in these kind of conversations. But you can see how, as you gave so beautifully, you see how it can migrate into so many other little areas. So, for example, you might have a person who is not necessarily just wants to stop living that particular lifestyle, but still may, be attracted, but not looking for some type of.
This is not trying. It's not about trying to rewire your brain or some Clockwork Orange, stick stuff in your eyeballs and reprogram you. It's just I want to have some help doing things differently in my life.
Correct. But if you intervene in such a manner, you could possibly be charged with a crime. And so this is something, again, that we should be hearing and be aware of, and realize that this can also then move into other venues. So, for example, the narrative in Canada, as we see in many other countries, abortion is legal. So if you start speaking of something that is, again, not the narrative, what kind of charge could come against you? So this bill, now a law, could be used in another way, because the language is so broad that someone, right now it doesn't mention about abortion, it doesn't mention, let's say, about euthanasia or some other area, but let's say that, but maybe the language could be twisted, manipulated to now include. And this is how these things happen, actually.
Yeah, and it was passed very quickly, like unusually quickly between through both houses of Parliament in Canada and given, signed into law. And I think one of the other issues that I've seen people discussing with this is that it's not just things in public, like you mentioned, pastors or religious sort of something spoken out in public, but there have been concerns that some of the language includes even private situations between private individuals consenting to having a conversation about these types of things. Expressing a viewpoint could be prosecutable.
Exactly. So now we're back to censorship.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that's what's raised the concern of so many people because of what you just brought up.
Yeah.
So it's not only the actual what the bill now law says and what it could possibly migrate to, and the other subjects that could become inclusive in that now law, but also the very fact of, again, two adults having, so, I'm stretching this now, but you could have two adults sitting at a pub having a beer and someone else overhears a conversation that these two people are having about a subject that is not part of the narrative that's being promoted, and all of a sudden, and then they record you. And so now all of a sudden you got another situation. So this is where you can see, where these kinds of laws that are being pushed or agendas that are being promoted, we should become aware of and realize, these are around us. They are growing, and the aggression, I'll use the word here in this situation, of these agendas are becoming more and more common. And what used to be perceived as something way out in the left, in the sense, that only happens in that kind of country, or it only happens under this kind of government. In reality, it's to our north in Canada, and it's in our own country here. And so
fast approaching, at
Correct.
least.
That's correct.
And it's kind of Soviet-esque, the situation you were describing of private individuals, the tattletailing and everything. Yes, so that's very disturbing. Father, can you give us maybe kind of, these events are distinct, right? And they're even about different issues in a certain sense, but they definitely seem to be dovetailing at about the same time as part of the same battle in this culture war, like we said earlier. Right. Can you give us kind of, what does that mean? What is the significance of these types of events becoming more? These are two large-scale, countrywide events. One example of kind of a loss in Canada, and one example of something that we're not really sure what's going to come out in Finland and Europe, I suppose you could say, as a whole. So in that sense, I wanted to ask Father, how much value are legal victories, right? Okay. Because we have a legal defeat in Canada, we have a potential for legal victory in Finland. Depending on the facts of the case and who's judging, it seems like she has quite a strong case to win under a fair government. So,
that's the operative, is fair, just.
But what's the value of that?
Well, let's kind of step back to a question you mentioned right before, and we'll kind of hopefully segue into that a little bit, is, what kind of moves this conversation? So, we've had this now in a number of our podcasts where we've talked about a different view of the human person, a different anthropology. And so here, when we consider, the value that we're speaking of, so we'll go back to the Finland case, and we see a very strong core value being advanced by Räsänen. And so when you think about the very fact there's a biblical value, the marriage and the beauty of human sexuality. And so she's advancing a very strong Christian value that has a very different view of human sexuality and a very different view of human persons. So versus what we see being pushed by a different narrative that basically looks at human sexuality as something I can express in any means, in any manner in which I wish. I'm free to exercise that in any manner, in any way I wish. And also a redefinition of marriage. So we can see the same thing, migrate into other things. For example, as we talked about with the C4 bill, now law, an issue of dealing with homosexual unions and relationships and so forth. So, and there again, we see where different sets of values, core values about human persons and about human sexuality. That's kind of how this whole thing, gets started. So we can have a common conversation because we share common values and we believe in these core values and we advance those core values. But again, you have a former minister of the Finland government who has a very different understanding of those values and voiced her disagreement with those values being advanced, whether it be within her own church by some leadership within that church, or whether it be within her own government that may be supporting a certain narrative. So she's definitely comes from a different point of view. And so, but I think the issue that we're discussing is that her point of view is a biblical point of view, a very Christian point of view. And this is what the real issue comes down, back to the cultural battle now. Yeah. Because for us here at HLI, obviously we are advancing what we know to be values that are anchored in biblical teaching. And so about the dignity of the human person, respect for human persons, the sacredness and dignity of marriage between one man and one woman, the whole gift of human sexuality, and in fact between husband and wife, open to the gift of life. So in defending life from the moment of conception, all the way to its natural end. Right. So we are advancing very, very specific values. But now we are living in a culture where these values are not always welcomed, where they are now basically seen as something that's offensive.
They're vilified.
Exactly. So now how do we keep this conversation going? And I think with the Räsänen case is talking about in Finland, and what we now see with the now law in Canada is something that should be very concerning, because how do we have a reasonable conversation and maybe even a reasonable disagreement where people of reason can disagree? And so how do we sit down at a table and work out these issues and be able to respect each other even when we disagree with each other? And obviously we've always in culture have seen values that were good for all. We've recognized the importance of protecting from certain behaviors and certain actions. And so this is not something uncommon to any of our societies.
Right. There's always been a sense of universality in law, even the most, liberal in the sense of the Enlightenment sense, the kind of classical liberal sense of baking into the government room for different opinions. I mean, that's the hallmark of American government.
Exactly.
But there was always, boundaries, right? And actually, those boundaries are defined precisely by the biblical values that you're talking about. For the most part, I mean, I think people can get on Catholics, Christians, pro-lifers for talking about biblical values, talking about religious values, and they say, "Well, don't force that on me." We'll say, "Okay, well, the culture that until about a few decades ago we're living in was entirely based on those values, right?" So it's not really a question of kind of a separate, special interest group. It's a question of what is the foundation of life. And that's why I think these problems, I don't know if you agree, Father, but why these problems it's come to such a head with essentially people in power who have a differing point of view, just saying, we're not going to tolerate any more dissent. Right. We got to clamp down on this stuff finally, because we thought it would be gone by now, but it's not. So got to stamp it out with the force of law.
I think if with all that, and absolutely right, Ted, and think of if we look at this, kind of step back here in the United States. So think when our ancestors came to this country, all right, and think about when Catholicism came to this country. Yeah. And and think of the difficulty the young Catholic community had coming to this nation. It wasn't a nation in the beginning, and so but as they began to move into the country, move into the land, and obviously it was met with hostility. There was but our Catholic brothers and sisters of that period, found a way, to keep advancing, to keep moving, and then to add their voice to the conversation for the good of our country. And how many people have contributed to that good since and continue to contribute to that good, even when you have people that disagree on certain principles and values, and ways of government, of self-governing. But we're still in the conversation. You're still at the table. And each of us here are contributing to the good and to the good of each other. And so, but now what we see is basically we're saying that, because within us, the church is very clear, and the church's teaching is very clear. We do not promote discrimination. We do not advance any cause that would disrespect another human being, that would mistreat or purposely mistreat, intentionally mistreat, or advance anyone that would be doing such a thing. The church would condemn that and does. So, but
any kind of coercion, any kind of aggression.
Exactly.
Any kind of
so we
violence.
respect other people. We might completely disagree, but the church does not advance, any type of discrimination. And as a matter of fact, it's very clear. The Catechism of the Church makes it very clear. So, but at the same time, we still advance what we believe. And our beliefs are not just something we academically study, it's what we believe and what we wish to exercise. And so here we have a growing problem. So are we going to, an example of that would be someone would talk about freedom of religion and freedom of worship. They're very different. And so here it's almost like, well, freedom of worship means I can go over here and I can worship only on this little piece of property, all right? Well, that's not what we believe here in the United States, and that is granted to us in our Constitution, all right? So the idea here is freedom of religion means I have the freedom to exercise that religion and in a respectful to articulate those beliefs. And so the concern that I have, and that's why I wrote this article, was that what we see in Finland, what we see to our brothers and sisters to the north of our country in Canada, is something that should really awaken us and realize that in our country we're seeing the same thing. And we're seeing it with regard to the whole transgender dysphoria issue. We're seeing this with the advancement of same-sex unions. We're seeing this with the so-called woke, culture. All of this is part of that.
And actually, I wanted to mention a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019, I'm not sure, people can look that up, our viewers. In Florida, there was a legal case that was essentially, it was in I think it was a county or some kind of regional area where they advanced a measure that was essentially like the Canada C4 bill, although just a lot smaller area where it would apply. And it was, a ban of this conversion therapy. And it didn't pass, or it was struck down by the court. So it did pass, but it was struck down by the Florida court there. And it said it was because it didn't have, because it baked in kind of a preference, special interest group, it said these kinds of conversion therapies are banned, but in the case of someone looking to get a transgender conversion, that is encouraged.
The equality clause.
And so that I think is also part of the Canada C4 bill.
That's correct.
But so anyway, my point is, it definitely is happening in the U.S., and that was a couple of years ago. It didn't. It was struck down, but who knows? Going forward.
And for our audience, just to kind of think back, and I'm not going to give dates or cities, but there's a major city, because right now I don't want to misquote. But I want to say it was in Illinois. But it basically is that a particular mayor wanted pastors had to turn in their homilies and their sermons to make sure that there were nothing bad in them with regard to people with same-sex attraction or other issues. Now that didn't fly, but just think about that. You have a person in authority.
Someone had the thought, maybe I can get away with this.
Right, and what we see today is that just to be able to think that they can do such a thing tells you that there is concern. And that's the whole part of the article, was really just to expose our readership and through our podcast to expose those who are listening, to these kinds of conversations and realities that are out there. And for us, we should, for especially here at Human Life International, what makes us concerned is that, we are advancing a very clear agenda and very much grounded in biblical traditional teaching and very much grounded in the heart of Catholic teaching. And so we're advancing. And so, it's something that we have to be aware of and to be mindful of. And we are not in the narrative. So it's very clear. And so someone like myself could be no different than the minister in Finland. I'm writing. I mean, my articles are out there.
We're here now.
We're here now on a podcast. So all this, quote unquote, can be used against us. And yet right now, both of us, and in my articles, are very clear that we're not demeaning anyone. We're not speaking ill of anyone. We're not doing anything other than speaking about these realities and also
about the issues. Right?
And also advancing what we believe, and which is based in our understanding of human dignity, human persons, and the dignity of marriage. And so this is something that, again, we just all need to be mindful of. And I want people to follow the Finland case, because you're right, Tad, is that it's really a landmark case. Because what happens on either way, whether it goes on her favor or not, it will have a ripple effect. A tremendous impact, and that can
Europe, throughout the world,
because it's a test case. There's no doubt this is what this is about, and so it's so we're going to see how they basically got their foot in the water, and they're trying to.
How far can we push this? How far can we take our power?
And when we see to our north, obviously they've pushed it pretty far, and I think that law will be. The court is still going to deal with it. Some are speaking about all the problems in that law. Constitutionally from the Canadian Constitution. So hopefully there'll be enough people that's going to, really fight against this particular law and see all the problems with it. And so we need to pray for those that are fighting a good fight.
Absolutely.
We need to pray for Ranas and people like her who are fighting a good fight. And I would ask all of them, please pray for HLI and for all of our directors and all the people we work with. Because I will tell you, many of them have also, had... in the sense of being pressured by government, to cease what they're doing.
Right, because HLI has affiliates throughout the world.
Correct.
And so thank you, Father, and please do pray for us, everyone. I had a couple more, just kind of briefly wanted to touch on these things, because we talk about the legal victories, legal situation. It's great if our freedoms and can be enshrined in law, at least our freedoms, if not our values themselves. But maybe that's not going to happen, right? So let's go from the spiritual angle, Father, to close this out. The Lord wants us to be prepared for martyrdom, even if it's a white martyrdom, which I would say someone like Räsänen is facing at this time, and anyone who would oppose the Canada C4 bill. How can we, as Christians, pro-lifers, Catholics, kind of be prepared for that? How can we be confident in essentially the truths that we have? Because they're biblical truths, but they're also, it's the real truth too. It's not just like a little, this is our set and we just want to have it. Like you said, it's not just freedom of worship, it's freedom of religion.
And also the natural law and just objective truth, so forth and so on. Yeah, we advance. But let me just speak to that very briefly. Let's just use here in the United States the legalization of abortion. So here we are since 1973. All right. So
it's almost 50 years.
Right. So what have we been doing since that landmark decision imposed upon our nation by the Supreme Court? All right. So we have been working tirelessly to mitigate that law, to redress it. And here we are at a moment of time where we may see the fruit of that. All right. And we've got to keep praying for this particular case that has now already been heard by the Supreme Court. We're just waiting for that decision to be now made public.
Right. In the case of Dobbs versus Jackson.
And we're very hopeful that that life and the dignity of women will prevail in this situation. But if it doesn't side with what we're not going to give up. We're just going to keep moving forward. And I think it's important for us not to lose heart. And that's with any law. For example, right now we're dealing with situations about euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide that's being advanced in some states. So there are many other areas that affect human life. We got the human trafficking issue. We have a litany of issues that are assaulting human dignity and human persons. So we have to keep working at this, which means we can't lose heart. We really have to be positive. We have to be determined. We have to be passionate about what we do, and we just have to have a will not to give up on it. Now, you point out why. It's because of our faith and because of the teaching of our Lord Jesus Christ and because of what we know. We know the truth, and the truth is it's what sets us free. And so we're advancing that truth, which means we have to smile, as we fight the good fight. We have to really care and legitimately, and I mean this very strongly, respect those that we disagree with and that may be completely opposed to what we are advancing, but we still have to love, care, respect, and do everything we can.
Pray for them, pray for their conversion.
Exactly, and not from a better than thou. The idea here is really want their well-being, want their conversion, want their salvation, and do everything I can in my ability to make that become reality. And I think this is where that spiritual component comes in. It's going to require sacrifices. I mean, if we were to speak to some of the people who have come before us, Tad, that we're here because of them. Yeah. We're privileged because of the people that came before
Standing
us
on the
who have been
shoulders of giants.
exactly. And so, here we are at a point where, what everything they had been hoping for, like Father Paul Marks, and who thought that, like many other pro-life leaders in those early days, thought we would be over this within 10 years, and even that was too long. But here we are, 50 years later, with this particular bad law. And how many millions have been lost, how many families have been broken, how much of our country has been wounded, how much violence has been promoted since that imposition upon our nation. So we just had to keep moving. So we have suffered, and many have suffered greatly, to fight the good fight. Many have lost their work. Many have lost their livelihood, in fighting this good fight. Like our friend in Finland. There's a possibility. Now she's at an age now, maybe she doesn't need to work, but still, reputation, her, what people think of her. It's all been put into the public sphere. So I think we just need to realize that there is a spiritual element to this as well, that I'm really fighting the good fight. I'm running that race. And what's in my mind and in my vision always is that crown of glory. And I'm going to bring as many people along as I can with me along that fight. But to do it with a real sense of peace and a joy that comes from being close to our Lord Jesus Christ and knowing what he said, I'm with you always. And a reminder that he always says, has told us, if they have persecuted you, know that they have persecuted me before you.
Right.
And that's something to be reminded of, because this is really what this is about. It's the cultural battle. It's two different visions, of human life and of the human person. So I find it, and I know this sounds strange, but I'm so grateful to be a part of it.
Right.
To be part of this great work.
Well, like you said, there's a little bit of a smile, a bit of a joy.
Yes.
Risus et bellum is a Latin phrase, laughter in war.
Right.
So there's definitely a bit of that in the culture war.
Exactly. So my response is stay positive, stay focused, stay prayerful, work on being holy. Right. This is the real issue, and really hear what Jesus says. Love your enemies. Love them. And we got to, and really that's the part we got to keep working at, because that's where the conversions come. Right. They come because we love them. Right. Otherwise, what's the whole point? I mean, we just got to keep trying. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that encouragement, Father. And I think we can close with that. So thank you everyone for watching. Please like the video and subscribe, and keep on living the culture of life. Thank you very much. God bless.